Hello everyone, it's Eric here, and in today's video I'm going to go over some recommendations for holiday gifts for someone in your life, and possibly yourself, that is into the miniature painting hobby. And I have two lists, so to speak, or two sets of 10 different gift ideas. I try to keep everything in these lists kind of under $50, so not to break the bank. I can make another list of like really luxury premium items to really get the most out of the hobby, but I'll keep it to below 50 for these lists. So the first list is going to be items I'd recommend for someone who's new to the hobby and kind of just getting their feet wet. They don't want to spend too much money, but they want everything they need. They may not know what they need to really get the most out of the hobby, and they don't want to spend tons of money. So the first thing I'd recommend is some good brush soap. Now this could be a good stocking stuffer. It's not very expensive, but it's very useful to keep your brushes in good order, especially if you have really good like Kolinsky Sable brushes. I use this all the time after every painting session. So all you have to do with the brush soap is just take off the lid, dip your brush in some water, ideally some clean water or cleaner water, and then run it through the soap. Start to make a nice little lather, kind of twirl it around. Put my brush back in the water, rinse off the soap, and then put it through a paper towel, and then put the little tube on the brush to keep it in good shape. Some people like to just put the brush in the soap and then run it through the creases of their hands, and that way a little bit of conditioner or soap stays on the brush to keep a nice point. Either way, it's fine. This stuff's great. It's pretty inexpensive. It can last you for a really long time. Although one thing I'd recommend is to, when you're done with the soap, try to make sure that you don't leave too much water or moisture in the soap itself. I like to take a little piece of paper towel and then remove or wipe away any moisture or water in the soap, because if there's too much water in there, it can build mold. So try to avoid that. All right, next item is paints, obviously, for the miniature painting hobby. If I were to start over and could only get one thing to get me going with paints, and it was kind of simple and fairly inexpensive, I get like a paint starter set like this. It has all your kind of primary colors from AK, and it's the 3rd gen paints, which I really like. They have pretty nice coverage. They have really nice dropper bottles with really nice lids. This has all your kind of red, yellow, blue, and CMYK colors, white and black, so you have the whole spectrum of primary colors to mix any other color from these. Now, working with these would require a lot of mixing, but it can be done. But I mean, for someone that's new, they don't want to spend a ton of money up front, but they want to experience, everything there is to experience from a basic perspective. I think this would be a good starting point. Hence it's why it's called the basic starter set. All right, next thing is brushes. So I would recommend kind of an inexpensive set of brushes. Maybe not the finest Kolinsky Sable, because if you're first starting, probably going to make a lot of mistakes. Maybe you don't clean them enough, or you go 20 minutes without washing your brush, or maybe you dip your brush too deeply in paint and it gets in the ferrule. But if you're working with some kind of intro brushes, then cheaper brushes, then it's not a big deal. So if you have a nice variety, then it should work. Now these may not be the greatest brushes, and sometimes if you're working with more inexpensive brushes, they're not sable. They may be, it says here they're sable, but they, hairs might fall off or whatever, but you kind of get what you pay for. But these get the job done, especially if you're first starting. All right, moving on. So assembly. The first thing I recommend is this Tamiya extra thin cement glue. I really like it. It's a really nice glue. I think most people in the hobby recommend this glue for plastic. I know GW mainly only really makes plastic right now, so this is really great for plastic. It has a nice container. It's glass, and it has a nice applicator brush, so you can get just a little bit right where you want it. And you can even put two pieces together and then run some glue along the seams. You can mix sprue into it and make something called sprue goo and fill in gaps. You can kind of remove odd imperfections in like if you are scraping off mold lines, and then you get a lot of excess material on there. You want to remove it really quickly. You can just put some glue on it. It works really well. It's really great glue, and the brush applicator makes it so much easier to use. It's so much better than, say, or in my opinion, it's so much easier to use than say like the Citadel or GW plastic glue with like the little really tiny thin little nozzle that always gets clogged, and some people will like take a little lighter and try to unclog it with that, but I'd rather not be you know, pulling out a lighter near, you know, really flammable stuff. But one downside of this is that it is a little smelly, and it even says on the label that fumes are harmful, so maybe try to work in a well ventilated area. All right, green stuff. This is really great for if you have gaps in your miniatures and you want to remove them, or you maybe want to add extra details. And I know a lot of model kits, especially bigger ones, they have gaps and they are pretty unsightly. And I think overall, I think you'd be happier if you remove them, even if it took a little longer. And green stuff is always just good to have on hand, just because it's so useful to fill in gaps or add details, or you can even sculpt your own miniatures with it. It's basically it's a 2-part epoxy putty called Kneadonite, I think that's what it's called. And you just mix the yellow and the blue stuff together in roughly equal portions, although generally you want a little bit more yellow than blue, and just remove the little center of the line where the yellow touches the blue, because that's already started to cure a little bit. And then you mix it together with your fingers, and then you can kind of sculpt it and mold it, and then wait for it to cure a little bit, and then start sculpting in some finer details. All right, sculpting tools. So if you have green stuff, you're probably going to want some metal sculpting tools. Now these are really good for kind of poking and prodding and getting a rough little ball or snake of green stuff into position where you want it on your miniature, and then you can kind of stretch it, push it, prod it, and kind of sculpt it with the metal tools. And it's really good for just getting the rough shape of what you want. I mean, if you're working with metal tools, you're going to leave little indentations or push marks where you're poking and prodding it, but that's okay because there's other better tools to smooth it out later, and these are pretty inexpensive. All right, moving along. So if you're assembling plastic miniatures, you're going to have a lot of mold lines and burrs from where you cut off the miniature from the sprue. So I'd recommend something like these sanding sticks. These are really nice to just sand away mold lines or burrs, and the nice thing is that they have like a foam backing, so they're kind of flexible so that you can use them on curved surfaces, and you won't flatten the curve because it has the foam backing, which makes it flexible. These are an insane amount of sticks. This is the one I saw. I mean, I just picked this one kind of a little arbitrarily, but something like this I'd recommend. You probably, if you're just starting, you probably don't need this many. This is a lot. Okay, so these are files. These are more hard files. Honestly, I kind of prefer these more than the sanding sticks. I mean, they both have their place. This is better for, in my opinion, to just get rid of a bigger burr or like the little gate that's still on the miniature when you first cut it off a sprue. This is really good for really scraping that away pretty quickly. But then the flexible sanding sticks are better for when you want a bit more finesse, or you're working on curved surfaces or things like that. Okay, next up we have sandpaper. I'd recommend a nice assortment of sandpaper. I mean, getting this once will probably last you your whole miniature painting career, just because you have a really nice assortment of grits from 120 to 3000. So 120 is really abrasive, and that'll really take off a lot of material, whereas 3000 is really subtle. It's really good for just like polishing and really getting something to be really smooth. Okay, so I probably should have had these a little sooner, but nippers. So these are nippers, or I guess you can call them cutters. I really like the ones from Tamiya. They're pretty inexpensive. They're about $21, and they do a really good job of cutting through the sprue. It's almost kind of like, it cuts almost like butter. It's far better than like $10 ones you get from like a hardware store. I mean, you can really notice the difference. It's just smoother and easy. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's better or more expensive nippers than this, but if you're just starting, this will give you a really nice experience without being too expensive. All right, this is the end of my wish list for people just starting the hobby. This is my advanced list for people that are in the hobby. They kind of let you know, or you know that this is something they like to do. They've done it for maybe a few years, and they're interested in maybe taking things to the next level, or being more efficient, or having a better experience. So a really nice Kolinsky Sable paintbrush will really make your painting experience better. And I think this is better for advanced users, because if you want to get the most out of this, then you really want to use like the brush soap and make sure you're not being too aggressive with this brush, and you're treating it kind of gently, and you're not just sticking it in paint pots and getting paint in the ferrule. You don't want to, you know, be too harsh on this brush because it is really expensive. So, but this really comes to a nice fine point, and it has a nice kind of bigger belly, so it can hold more paint. It can come to a fine point, so you can just start painting really fine lines and a lot of lines before having to go back to the palette to pick up more paint. Whereas with a really tiny brush, you might think that would be better for painting smaller details, but I find with really tiny brushes is that they don't hold a lot of paint, and the paint often dries on the brush pretty quickly before you even put it on the model. So ironically, these are probably, in my opinion, better for most small details than really tiny brushes, just because they're really high quality and they come to a nice point, and it's the point that ultimately allows you to get really nice fine details. Okay, a paint rack. The more paints you collect, the more important it is to be organized. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of different colors from different brands, and you're not going to know where things are. And you know, I already have a lot of paint, and this is becoming increasingly a problem for me. So I put this in the advanced section because if you're just starting, you don't have that many paints, so it's not as big of a deal. But when you do have like over like 100 paints, then you're going to need to organize them. And something like this I think would be great. I know there's a lot of different kinds of paint storage racks. I know there's nail polish racks that you hang on your wall. There's stands that stand vertically that you put paint in sideways. So I'd recommend maybe shopping around and seeing what would work for you, but just something is better than nothing. All right, an airbrush. So I know airbrushes are kind of controversial in the sense that a lot of people feel that it's a specialist tool, it's really expensive, and you shouldn't need it, and it's not truly painting. You're just spraying paint on there. And I kind of felt this way a while ago too, and I was just very intimidated by the whole prospect of you have to get a compressor, and the compressor's loud, and the compressor gets hot, and the compressor might burn something down, and you have to get, you know, an airbrush, and those are expensive, and I didn't know anything about airbrushes, and you have to worry about the fumes or paint particles getting in the air and getting in your nose, so you need a special mask or maybe a respirator, or you need like an expensive spray booth to kind of funnel the paint particles into like a filter or outside through a window. It was just so intimidating that I didn't think about it, and I just never looked at getting an airbrush. But I know I saw a video of someone just using this portable airbrush compressor, and you know, this portable airbrush really solves a lot of my problems, or I think it would solve a lot of people's problems, of the fact that you can use it outside. So that means you don't have to be so worried about getting in a spray booth. You don't have to, you know, worry about so much about getting a respirator. You maybe just want like a basic mask, and it's just cheaper. You don't need a expensive compressor that's really loud and it doesn't overheat. And yeah, I've got one of these recently, and I've been using it a lot. It's really nice. It really works. I mean, now I'm kind of like one of those people where it's like, how come I didn't use this sooner? But I mean, it's not like the end all and be all, but it is a really useful tool, and it can really speed up your painting process, just especially for like priming and base coats. But this is by no means like a ultra precision tool. It's kind of basic, but it does get the job done if you just want some base coats and to prime some miniatures. You can take it outside, you can hold it, it's pretty lightweight, you can charge it via like a USB-C from wherever you want to charge it in from, and it's a twin action, so you can it has everything you need in like a modern airbrush, and you can use different airbrushes with it. So if you buy this and want to upgrade and want to get like a fancy Harder and Steinbach airbrush, then you can use this with it. Well, that's what I see other people doing, but I haven't done that myself yet, but I intend to. So also, you can see it's not too expensive. I'd highly recommend it just to try it if you've never tried an airbrush before. But it is it's made in China, and it kind of shows. It doesn't really feel like super premium, and you know, I know the back end of mine is kind of the batteries falling out, so I have to put it back in and maybe tape it up or something. But yeah, really nice. Really solves a lot of problems for getting into airbrushing, so highly recommend it. All right, next item is clay shapers, or maybe these are called color shapers or silicone shapers. But These are really great for working with the green stuff. The tool that I talked about before when working with green stuff to smooth it this is the tool. So these are made of silicone, so the green stuff doesn't easily stick to it. And if you just put a little water on these and then brush over the green stuff, you can really smooth it out. You can really smooth out fingerprints or tool marks or impressions, and you can kind of push it and prod it and roll on it and get a smooth texture, get subtle details. And this is more for like finessing the green stuff, I think, as opposed to like really sculpting it or getting big broad movements or getting the big basic shape on it. Get the big basic shapes down with the metal tools and then finesse it and smooth it and poke it and prod it with the clay shapers. Alright, so tweezers. I'd recommend tweezers I mainly use them for converting, but also for decals. So they're really good for if you have just really, really tiny details you want to add to a miniature. Like, for instance, if you're converting or you're building something and you just want to add tiny little pouches or tiny little details, whatever you're working with. I'm talking about so tiny that you couldn't reasonably pick them up with your fingers. And also for decals. So I feel like you probably don't need this if you're first getting started, but when you get a little bit more advanced and you really detailed and really nuanced and you want something for decals, then these are a great choice. And this is a nice selection of tweezers, especially this one here, the third from the top. It has they're called self-locking tweezers, so you only squeeze them to open them up and then you just let go to secure something. Whereas with these other tweezers, you have to press down the whole time you're picking something up. So great gift idea, and they're pretty inexpensive. All right, pin vise. This is really good for drilling out the barrels on your weapons and for pinning. I mean, that's really the only two things you're going to use this for. So if something, if you're working on something like a Space Marine and he's got a gun, and you can just start with like a pilot hole with like a thumbtack or something, and then or an X-Acto knife, and then just get your pin vise and start drilling into it, and that makes it look a lot better. I know I see people that don't drill their barrels, and I'm thinking, you really got to drill your barrels. In my opinion, it adds so much, and it's so simple that I don't know, it's almost like mandatory in my opinion. But of course, I'm not going to criticize someone unless they ask me for it. But just my opinion. And it's pretty inexpensive, and this comes with a ton of different drill bits. All right, a wet palette. This isn't totally mandatory, but it's, if you are more advanced and you're looking to kind of up your miniature painting hobby, you really need a wet palette, in my opinion. It's just it really extends the life of the paint you put on it. And acrylic paints, one of their key features is that they dry really quickly, which is nice when you actually put the paint on the miniature, but it's not so nice when it's drying out really quickly on your palette. So you have to keep going back to your paint and using more paint. So if you keep the paint wet with the wet palette, the paint is wet for longer, and then it can last for your whole session, and you use less paint. It's just easier. It makes your process and your life a lot simpler. So highly recommend a wet palette. This is kind of a basic one, but you can even make your own with like parchment paper and like paper towels. But recently I've been using more just commercial wet palettes or pre-made wet palettes. It's just a little easier, especially if they have extra palette paper. I don't have to make my own or cut it, so that's just more convenient. All right, a pen holder. So this is a pen holder, and I use these for holding miniature paintbrushes. So they say the best way to store your paintbrush in between sessions is to hold it or to store it horizontally, because they say if you store it with the brush or the bristles standing on top, if you store it vertically with your brushes on top or your hair on top, then the paint kind of seeps down into the ferrule, and that's not good for the brush. And they say storing it upside down may not be the best. Yeah, so these are great for storing your brushes in between sessions, and I've been using it for a while now, and it's pretty convenient. All right, a magnifying lamp. This is, I wasn't sure whether to put this on like the beginner list or the more advanced list, because you can't paint what you can't see. So this is honestly one of the most important things for painting. Yeah, this is one of the most important things you need. Basically, your light for painting, you need a good magnifying, maybe not magnifying, but you just need good light in general. And something like this is just probably one of the best ways to get good light for what you're painting. And these can get pretty expensive. So here it's like $50. It's the most expensive thing on this whole list. but they can get a lot more expensive. But you need something, you need some kind of light to see what you're doing, and just ambient light from the room is really not very good. I remember I painted in like a store recently, and just there was only like light from the ceiling and the windows, and yeah, I could barely see. You need good light. You need good light. And how much you want to spend on something like this is up to you, but in a certain sense, it's like everything, you kind of get what you pay for. So if you're willing to pay a little more, it'll be a little better maybe, but if you pay less, then well, it should be adequate. All right, and the last thing on the advanced list is our magnifying goggles. So I really like this one. I've been using it a lot. I always like to have it on hand. It's really nice for when you want to paint things like eyes or just really tiny details or really tiny edge highlights, and you just want, you know, maximum control and maximum kind of light on what you're doing, because it has a little light on top of it and it's rechargeable. It charges with a USB cable, which is really nice, and it just allows you to get those really tiny details like eyes or whatever. But just word of caution, it can be a little uncomfortable if you wear it for too long, but yeah, I'd highly recommend it if you are looking to be a little more advanced with your painting. Alright, so this has been my list for gift ideas for the hobbyist in your life, or possibly ideas that you might want for yourself. So I'll leave some links in the description below to everything you see, and there'll be affiliate links, so you know, I would get a tiny little kickback of what anybody purchased on there, but honestly, I do recommend everything I've suggested, or a version of everything I've suggested. So I hope these are good ideas and they get your brain stirring for things that might kind of improve your painting. And you know, if you don't want to use my links, just feel free to just Google it on Amazon. If you don't trust my link or whatever, that's fine, but I just recommend it and would recommend people using these things. So yeah, if you have any comments or questions below, let me know in the comment section. I thank you so much for watching this video, and if you like my content, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye bye.